The Spotlight, shining a light on podcasts and videos that have caught our attention.
Hi and welcome to The Spotlight. My name is Jen Spiker and today I'm highlighting more of a recent conversation that Phil Edwards had with his guest co-host on Sunday Morning Together. As the name suggests, Sunday Morning Together is heard every Sunday on Vision and available on demand in the Vision app. Each week, Phil spends time unpacking his guests' stories. There's also a time of communion and 5-minute sermon. A recent guest co-host on Sunday Morning Together was Pastor Brad Peterson, who is known as the Shearing Pastor. Last time, Pastor Brad shared some of the opportunities that have come through his unique bivocational role.
The Spotlight with Jen Spiker.
Well, there's something very sort of bonding about it when you're working hard alongside somebody, and it opens opportunity for conversation. Can you recall any, without giving anything away that's sensitive, can you recall any great conversations that you've had through that opportunity?
Yeah, for sure. And like you say, there's been so many, and there's been lots of ones that, I think the boys that think you don't really take seriously, they just sort of say something out of the side of their mouth sort of thing, but they're actually intrigued. And, I remember one older fella was shearing on a Saturday and we needed to finish the sheep on the Sunday morning, and I was preaching at church the next day. I said, "Oh, sorry, boys, I'm not going to be able to be back to help you finish. I've got to preach tomorrow." And they knew that anyway. And he just come and lean over and I'm shearing the sheep and he says, "Brad, make sure you say some prayers for me, mate." And, it might sound like a bit of a joke and that, but yeah, I know that in his heart there, and opportunities like that, just to be the light, just to show that there's hope out there, that I'm not ashamed of the gospel, that you can make fun of me, and I've been made fun of heaps and it does not bother me. I think I'd rather be popular with Jesus than popular with people, and people respect that. And so, yeah, lots of opportunities like that. It's certainly in meeting my wife down south when I met her, I've got lots of opportunities with a bunch of shearers down south of WA, and still friends to this day.
Yeah.
Done their weddings and things like that, funerals. Mm.
Well, let's talk about your wife, because I understand there's a story there too of where you met and then what happened after that.
Yeah, absolutely. So first time I sort of took off shearing on my own and gone down south to a place called Jerramungup, another big name. Mm-hmm. And my wife was the barmaid at the pub, which was where I was put up to stay. And I remember walking in that first night, and she poured the beer that well. She's been pouring them for 20 odd years ever since. No, so we hit it off as soon as we met, and I was sort of up and down in my faith at that time, but we ended up before we got married, Sky ended up becoming a Christian and giving her heart to the Lord. We've been married just over 20 years now, and 3 children, and actually got one on the way, which I can announce now. So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Children are a blessing from the Lord, but sometimes some things can happen that change things very quickly. That happened to you, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's happened very suddenly, and that's a great point. And yeah, so our oldest son, Blaze, when he was 6, was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, which is about 6 kids a year in Western Australia will get that type of leukemia. It's a blood cancer.
Pretty rare. And I was sheep shearing in Nungaran at the time, and at that time got the phone call to get to the hospital in Merredin because they were taking him on the Royal Flying Doctors to Perth because he needed a blood transfusion. We didn't know there was going to be disease involved. So I raced there to get to the plane before he took off, and as a 6-year-old there, I went to put my hands on him. I said, "I'm going to pray for your son," not knowing what the future held. And it was so funny. He looked back and he's all plugged up, and he put his own hand on his head and he said, "No, it's all right, Dad. I've already prayed for myself." And I said, "Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome." And the faith of a child, eh?
Exactly. And so that night, 9 p.m. that night was when I got the phone call that pack everything up, move to Perth, Ronald McDonald House. Everything in your life's about to change. She's been diagnosed with leukemia, and everything turns around very quickly. Anything can happen.
So it was really 24, 48 hours. You were in Perth and life was very different.
Absolutely, very different with, going into chemotherapy pretty much almost straight away, not quite straight away, almost. Having 2 little kids, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and Blaze, a 6, isolated,
treatment in an isolated room for 40-day segments, which ended up being for over a year, or about exactly a year. So yeah, everything turned around very quickly, and we're very much, I couldn't work with the treatment and juggling the kids going back and forward.
Yeah.
So it became a life-changing and harder than any sheep shearing job I've ever done was that year at the hospital, that's for sure.
Pretty hard stuff, Brad. I wonder, how did you and your wife, Sky, deal with that? What was your instant reaction?
Yeah, well, initially, as you say, it's total shock. We hadn't really had cancer or sickness close to our family, and it'd always been something you'd watch on telethon or watch on the news, and then suddenly you're sitting in those rooms.
You're it,
and you're talking to those oncologists, and you're hearing words that you've never heard before, like nasal gastric tube, Broviac, platelets, blood transfusion, all the words you like now would become second nature. And there was one male nurse that we met when we first walked in, and he looked at me, and I'll never forget, he just said, "Oh, you're going to know everyone's name in this place by the time you leave." I thought, thanks, mate. That's not really what I want to hear, but he was completely correct.
Yeah.
But total shock. And certainly we reached out, our family, our friends, in prayer. And we're basically, for me as a dad, not so much physically, but metaphorically, I want to say I was just on my knees for God's help in what we're about to face. And in fact, that's actually one of the first things we did, was I reached out to all my friends, Christian friends and churches, and I made a big poster up of every church that was praying for Blaze and put it in the room with all these churches surrounded by a photo of him. And right from the start wanted to make it that we start with prayer. Even Blaze on the Royal Flying Doctors had prayed for himself, so it was all begun with prayer.
Yeah, so good. You have that initial shock reaction, but soon enough you take a step back, you can find a bit of rhythm and figure out what to do. And you mentioned earlier on that you'd go running through Kings Park there, great place to go running in Perth. What else would you do?
Yeah, that was a big one for me. When you're under immense stress and anxiety, that we are body, soul and spirit, and that we need to look after our bodies. And so I would look after my body. Running was massive. What else I would do was meditation. When I'd say meditation, what I mean by that is really spending time verbally saying God's promises out of his word. By his stripes we have been healed. With long life he will satisfy me. And I'd claim these promises over my son and spend time doing it. They were, some would say, coping mechanisms, and yeah, they certainly were. The only way I could cope was by clinging on to God's promises, his word. Worshipping was a big one, and just having good friends around you to talk to in any hard time you need. You can't do it on your own. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of those promises there. Were there some others or other key scriptures that were really meaningful to you, spoke to you and your wife?
Yeah, there was many. There's a key one I'll share in the 5-minute sermon that you told me the best 5-minute sermon I've got to go for. But other ones were, there's one in Proverbs which says, "For as a person thinks in his heart, so is he."
Yeah.
And so for us, it was really key about where our thoughts would go. And I used to have hallucinations at night time of funerals with little coffins, and I'd wake up sweating in the middle of the night with all these sorts of things, these fears of the future. And so for me, I needed to really capture every thought and make it obedient to the promises of God. So for me, that one, as I think in my heart, so am I. And I want to be thinking what God's thinking in this situation. So that was a key one, and lots of others, but that was very powerful for us.
So where did the story go? Your son had this issue to deal with. He received treatment. There was a lot of prayer going on. What happened?
Yeah, so he did 4 rounds of chemotherapy, and we did that all, just the way that we were meant to do it, so to speak, following the protocol that the hospital did. And even though he was in remission at that time after 6 months, he still didn't look great to us, we thought. But anyway, they gave us a letter, a clean bill of health, and said, "You probably will never see us again." So after 6 months, we went back, and I was out in the shearing shed, got back into it really only for a few days, actually. So we were only gone for a few weeks, and I got a photo from my wife, and she sent me this photo while I'm shearing of a bruise that had come up on Blaze's body. And as soon as I saw it, just hit me in the guts. It was black bruise, and I sent it to the oncologist who had given us a private number at the time, and she just said, "You better get in your car and get straight back down here." And so we were back down there, and the leukemia had relapsed in such a way that it was now chemo resistant, incurable by chemo, mutated to what they told us a 40% chance for him to survive, and could only be curable by a bone marrow stem cell transplant if we could find a suitable match. And weird, that was really scary because, there was a family near us who, for their little boy, couldn't find a match in 30 million donors. And that was, obviously traumatic for them. And so we were now right in the middle of the mess, the pressure, the adversity.
Wow. And?
Yeah, and so it was interesting. I got tested, Sky got tested, we all got tested, and I wasn't a match, Sky wasn't a match. And interestingly enough, what's really amazing about this story, Phil, is that Blaze we needed help to have children. We went through IVF, and they told us we wouldn't have any more children. But in 2010, naturally, we had his sister called Chloe. And at the time she was about 4, and she came up, and when she got tested, she was a bone marrow stem cell match for our son, a sibling match, which the oncologist looked at me and said, "Well, you basically got a miracle there." And so we ended up doing all the chemo again, did it a bit different this time. We complemented it with good anti-cancer nutrition and got in a proper coach from the Gold Coast to live with us and train us. And we really saw God's hand in holistically approaching this. And long story short, on January the 7th, 2016, so nearly a year of treatment, Chloe gave her bone marrow stem cell blood, and it went into Blaze, and that was the moment. I got it on video where he received that life-saving blood, and he's now 16 today. He got his L's yesterday, so he's dangerous and on the road now. He's but that was amazing, and it mid-February, we were able to walk out of that hospital. I'll never forget, I took a photo of walking out on February the 9th because we had been put in on February the 10th the year before. So it was a full 365 days of in and out. And that was the final walk out where we wouldn't have to do chemo again. And I just wept with thanks to God.
Yeah, what a feeling.
We had that. Yeah, and that life-saving blood was being carried since Chloe's birth all those years, 6 years, 4 years, I should say.
Well, multiple miracles right there, And when you're in the thick of something, very different to when you've gone through and you look back. So from the perspective you're at now, as you look back, what's the big lesson out of all of that? What do you carry forward from it?
Yeah, really good question, Phil. I think the big lesson for me when I look back is don't take it for granted. When I look back, I just think, I just pinch myself at what we went through. And the big lesson for me is never lose hope in the middle of the mess. Never give up. And for me, the world would say it this way: go with your gut. And for me, I say go with that gut instinct of the Holy Spirit. Like I had to sign a waiver in front of 13 or so oncologists to say that we are going to be the ones that will be providing all the food for our son in this hospital from now on. We rejected all the hospital food and I had the Holy Spirit convict me in my gut that was the right thing to do, that if our food proved fatal, that we wouldn't sue the hospital. That was the kind of waiver it was. But I went with my gut to trust God that we were going to complement the chemo with this wonderful nutrition. The transplant nurse that had been there for 30 years looked at me and said, "Brad, we never thought this would work, but you did it, and the doctors are amazed at how your nutrition really worked." He had no side effects during most of that chemo. It was amazing. Praise God.
On the Spotlight, we've been listening to part of a conversation between Vision CEO Phil Edwards and Pastor Brad Peterson on Sunday Morning Together. It's encouraging to hear how God has been with Brad and his family through some incredible highs and lows over the years. There's more to this conversation, and you can hear it in full, plus Pastor Brad's communion message and 5-minute sermon, by tapping the podcast tab of the Vision app. Just search for Sunday Morning Together to find this and many more episodes. If you have a favourite podcast or video series that you'd like to hear featured on the Spotlight, click Contact Us at vision.org.au and share the link. My name is Jen Spiker. Join me next time as I share another podcast or video that deserves highlighting.
For more great podcasts and videos like the one featured today, check out vision.org.au or the free Vision app.